Good morning. Good morning. I'm audible and visible. Okay, perfect. We'll wait for 2-3 minutes and then we'll start. Today we have to discuss a very interesting module, which is Russian Revolution. We'll be going to Russia and trying to understand its history. And then we also have to understand today Marxism, socialism, communism, ideologies, and concepts. Then tomorrow, which is what, Friday? Yes, 3rd November, 4th November. 3rd November, we will discuss uh, the road to Second World War. And Saturday, if you remember, at 6 a.m. we meet. We will discuss World War II and Cold War politics. And then we meet again on Monday, which is 6th, which will be colonization and decolonization. And as you remember, 7th November is our doubt session, which is Tuesday. This is, you have to send your doubts at islive@byju's.com. Signing of armistice is the cease of the war. The cease of the war. Treaty of Versailles after that. Unification of Italy was in Cavour's. It was not in Ottoman Empire's hand. Little bit was with Austria. Austria has a border with Italy. So in that unification, Trinotrist area was not basically consolidated by Cavour. Okay, I'll wait for a minute more and then we'll start. But this is basically our story. Is it Germany the main reason for First World War? No. The Second World War is fully Germany's fault. First World War, as you saw, was an interplay of multiple factors. Good morning, good morning. Ashwarya will talk about that. You can, but that is totally your choice. When we will do Modern India, we'll discuss that. How to write an answer introduction on an answer on Eastern Crisis. Alok, firstly, they'll not ask you a question on Eastern Crisis. But even if they ask you about the Eastern Crisis, you have to just say what happened before it, which is Crimean War and how there were certain tendencies in Europe. That's it. If they ask you about causes of the First World War, you have to discuss that between 1800 and 1900, there were multiple issues which were developing, and then come to the 1900 to 1905 period, or rather that first 14 years. So you have to talk about those tendencies. It is on you how much you want to emphasize on that. Okay. So we start module number 6 today. Russian Revolution and ideologies. That means, Pooja, that she was very instrumental in what we call as war relief, and that led to the formation of the Red Cross. A question was about modern community. Again, Kishan, you're mixing up two things. Firstly, give me that question. But communism as an ideology has never, or ideologies have never been directly asked in the examination. Okay. Immediate causes assassination of, yes, Sarajevo crisis. Okay. Still confusion. World War, like the reasons for alliances, different countries, or Germany started the war. Firstly, Germany did not start the war. So it was in PSI or optional. So Kishan, that is not of a discussion we have to do here. So this is a GS level world history we're doing. You're talking optional level PSIR. And as it is, the emphasis changes totally. You have to talk about, when we talk about causes, alliances was one of the cause. Germany did not start the war, Serbia started the war. So try to understand that everything which we've been doing is about how every country reacted, but for that there was a factor. So they are not going to ask you to Germany. I will show you the question which came previously asking you who was responsible for the war. But if you're still going to say that Germany is responsible for the war, then there's a problem. Because then that whole backstory is useless. Second World War, yes. First World War, no. How to write introduction cause, Vanshika, I'll tell that when we will do in the doubt section. The doubt class we have on Tuesday. I'll have a discussion on answer writing, don't worry. History questions are a little bit complicated to understand. That is, Aishwarya, not even true. Polity questions are difficult to understand. GS paper 2 is difficult to understand. GS paper 1, always straightforward questions are there. So if you're finding them complicated, it's either you are not understanding the question in the sense that it's straight. Most of the questions are always straightforward. Always straightforward. GS paper 1 is not known for complexity of question. It is GS paper 2 which is known for that. In which polity, IR, they start to play with words. Big heavy words they will use, but that is not complication. That is just trying to distract. Okay. We will discuss answer writing on when we will meet on Tuesday for the doubt section. We will for sure discuss answer writing, how to approach it. Okay. Today we go to a country which we've been talking about quite a lot but have not discussed their history. We've discussed France, we've discussed America, we've discussed Britain, we've discussed, for example, we've discussed a lot about Ottomans, and we have gone into the intricacies of how these countries were fighting with each other. But one country which we have been talking about quite a lot is Russia. But we have not talked about Russia and how Russia is now going to become a major problem for the West after 1917. After 1917, it will become a major problem for the West because it will create a certain type of understanding which is going to be problematic. A new type of system is going to come out, and that is the problem of Russia at this point of time. So Russia ceased to be a threat. So maybe between 1900 and 1917 it was not a threat. After the First World War, it was seen as a problematic existence because Russia will become USSR, and that is the problem which the West will face generally. But there are two stories which we have to discuss here. First is the story of three events. One is called October Manifesto. This is 1905. Thereafter, you have February Revolution, which is 1917 February. And there's October Revolution, also called as the Bolshevik Revolution, first socialist revolution in October of 1917. Now, most of the students, they mix up this. There is a difference of for 12 years between October Manifesto and October Revolution. These are two very different events. We have to traverse from the period of 1800 and reach till 1917 to explain certain number of things. And for that, let's try to understand Russia. Let's try to understand Russia. Now, when we talk about Russia, Russia is a very big country, very, very big country. To give you a basic idea of that, this is basically the spans of Russia from the Pacific to to the Northern Sea, to the Baltic Sea, to the Black Sea. It is a very big continent. So I'm trying to establish the geography here. But whilst it is a very big continent, close to 70 to 80%, 70 to 80% of its population is actually towards, I'm not saying USSR, I'm saying Russian Empire. USSR, I will discuss with you later. That's a separate issue altogether. The point is that Russia, the western sector, has more population than the eastern sector, wherein most of their population is concentrated in the western sector. And the reason for that is that this is basically the European side, the Atlantic side. And in a way, it is believed that the Ural Mountains are like a division between the two parts of Russia. Yes, yes, Shreyank. Now, now, most of the important cities, this is Russian Empire, from Moscow to St. Petersburg to Riga to Minsk to Vilna to what we call as Sevastopol, all are on this side. Now, the all-weather port, the all-weather port of Russia is Sevastopol because it only is the port which does not freeze in the winters. Their biggest and most busiest port is St. Petersburg. But the problem is St. Petersburg, the Baltic Sea, and this whole sector in the winters is not very, very navigable. So the point, what I'm trying to argue here is it's a very big empire, but its geography is also its weakness. Because when it came to movement between the two parts of Russia, from western to eastern, there is and used to be a train called the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is that there used to be one or two trains which used to go up and down. But at this point of time, traveling from, for example, Moscow to Vladivostok could take you 2 to 3 months. And the train itself used to take 15 to 20 days. So their movement between this part and this part is very, very slow. Is very, very slow. But the empire itself is very, very big. And most of Russia is a desert, basically cold desert, which is called the Siberian sector. This area which you see is yellow, this is basically the heart of Siberia. This is called the Siberian sector, and they're very close to the Arctic Circle, and that is why they're very, very, very cold environments. Minus 50, minus 60, minus 60, minus 30 is considered very, very normal in this sector. So first thing which I've tried to establish or I'm trying to establish is a very simple point, which is that geographically, Russia's or Russian Empire is vast, but the infrastructure and movement between Western and Eastern Russia is very limited. The empire is big, but that was problematic administratively. That was problematic administratively. Because then it is a very, very hard empire to administer. So both parts are very in two different parts of the world itself, and they have a major issue of not having access to the Atlantic Ocean and naval power. Anybody has any issue in this point? Geography. We've been discussing about Russia quite a lot. You already know about Russia. Anybody has any issue here? No, sir. Now, let's talk about the polity of Russia, which is that how does Russia, in a way, operate, or what is the political structure of Russia? Now, when you talk about Russia, did not have direct access. It had to go through the Baltic Sea or it has to go through the Mediterranean. There is no port of Russia which straight away opens into Atlantic. No port. They have to go via the Baltic Sea, the Northern Sea, or they have to go through the Mediterranean, which is basically problematic. And administrative issue would be that if you have a very vast empire in which it can take 2 months to travel in between two parts, the administrative communications, how you rule that area is problematic. So the point is that they have their biggest strength, which is their geography, is also their biggest weakness because they can't respond quickly to things. Right? Can we talk about polity? Okay, now the way Russia is ruled, they have a czar. They have a czar, who's nothing but the king. Two different type of spellings you will see: czar, czar, and very simply, the czar is the absolute power of Russia. More than that, he projects a lot of power, and Russia had created a very strong image of its rulers and the power of Russia. Basically, they claim to be very mighty and divine, which is that they claim to be the most powerful nation empire in the world itself. Under the Tsar, there was something called the Duma. Duma is a word for parliament, but this institution was not representative and just nominated by the Tsar to show that there was democracy. That there was democracy. Divine in the sense that God himself made the Russian Empire. The king is divine. So the point is that this institution is a fake institution. So all power is concentrated here. And the biggest point is questioning the Tsar was unimaginable. That you are not going to question the regime, you are not going to question the Tsar. So he has created a certain image about himself, and most of the rulers of Russia come from a dynasty called the Romanov dynasty. And for our story, three people are important: Alexander I, Tsar Alexander I, Nicholas I. Have we discussed about Nicholas I previously? Have we discussed about Nicholas I previously? What context? Yes, Crimean War. So Nicholas I and thereafter Nicholas II. No, Elias, we'll discuss that same thing. Now, this is the power of the Russians, that they project a certain type of power. But the problem in Russia will start to become evident if you'll go into social and ethnic. What was the biggest weakness? What was the biggest weakness of the Ottoman Empire? Don't give me that concept of administrative and this that. The reason for the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire was what? Very good. Diversity and multiple ethnicities. So basically, it was the minorities which allowed for the Ottoman Empire to go out of hand. The Ottoman Empire's biggest strength was its diversity, but it became the biggest weakness also in the era of nationalism. And that was because the Ottomans never Ottomanized their minority. Now, Russia was also multi-ethnic. Russia was also multi-ethnic. Wherein, if you look at this map, every color represents a different ethnicity. So you have the majority, which is the Russians, the red color. However, you have Ukrainians who are different culturally to the Russians. You have the Belarusians who are again different. Then you have the whole Central Asia sector: Kyrgyzstan, Tatars, Uzbekistan, the Kyrgyz, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, the Turkmeni, the Azerbaijani. And then you even have Georgians. Finland used to be a part of it. The Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Latvians. The point is, it is very, very, very diverse. If Ottoman Empire was diverse, for example, for 50% or 100%, Russia is 200% more diverse. It is also it is multi-ethnic, very diverse. Very diverse. And the point is that throughout its empire, religious, not religious, but ethnic minority population was spread throughout the empire. Was spread throughout the empire. Now, this could have been the biggest issue in Russia. This could have been the biggest issue in Russia, but Russians were not like the Ottomans. And against the ethnic minorities, Tsar Alexander I followed a very conscious policy of what is called Russification. Policy of Russification, which is that through force, through coercion, ethnic minorities were made to accept Russian culture. So they had to give up on their languages, eating habits, rituals, all were taken away. Basically, they speak like a Russian, they think like a Russian, they eat like a Russian, and they look like a Russian. However, they were ethnic minorities. So Russia, in a way, eliminated the biggest threat to their empire from within. From within. So the Ottomans had a ticking time bomb within themselves, but that is not true for the Russians. Russia culturally was very stable. As much as there is a lot of imprisonment, there is force coercion. After a certain point, after 2 to 3 generations, the Russification policy starts to become more and more evident. So the Ottomans and the Russians have same thing in common, which is big empire, multiple ethnicities. But the Ottomans chose not to push the culture of their own understanding. Rather, the Russians understood that this could become a threat over a period of time, and therefore Alexander I followed a proper policy of Russification. Make them think like a Russian and make them look like Russians. They should be Russian in character. So this is a very important policy which the Russians followed. Anybody has any issue here? Because then I want to talk about the different stratas of society. No? Okay. Now, so geographically we've established very big empire, port problem. Politically, Tsar is, I'll write all of this down in one PPT, don't worry. Tsar is the ultimate power. And now we also established that the ethnic minorities did not. So basically, the impetus of change in Russia is not going to come from the ethnic minorities because they have been Russified. Therefore, the threat of the ethnic minority is not there only. However, when we talk about the social structure or social stratas, that is different. Tsar is the title which is given to the king. Maharaja the Raj, that is. Now, you have aristocracy, which is basically relatives of the king, most wealthy and powerful. What does the Russification include? Everything. Everything. Whatever you can imagine is included in that. But it is the peasant and it is the artisans and workers which basically suffer. But more of the peasants. Russia never had a proper industrial revolution. Limited state sponsored education is the name of the person, group, it's It's a name of the whole. It's basically a generic term for everybody related to the king, aristocracy, nobility, whatever you want to call it. Limited state-sponsored industrialization. On the other hand, the biggest issue is that here very long hours, meager pay. So basically, it's a standard issue. But the peasants are under even more distress, because till 1861 feudalism existed. After 1861, something called redemption payments were the issue. Now I'll tell you what this means. Everybody's with me till this point, no issues? I'm trying to set the scene. Much like the French Revolution, I'm trying to set the scene for Russia, which is that what does Russia look like, what it is, how it is, before we go into and understand the revolutions. Okay, now the see till 1861 there is serfdom. There is serfdom. I'm coming to that. What is redemption payment? Wait. There's serfdom. Serfdom means that there's a landlord or vassal, as it is called, and you are the bonded labor of the landlord or serf. So you work on a land, land owned by vassal, and you can get basic subsistence agriculture out for your own purposes. Very basic, very straightforward. Now, this bondage between vassal and serf is both a social bond and an economic bond, but more of a social bond, which is that you are socially obligated to be with that serf, with that vassal. The point is that you are obligated. You can't go to a different vassal. It's a society based or socially sanctioned bondage. How you have dasa dasi, how you have socially accepted bondage. Now, in this concept, there is no what we call as room for peasants to do anything. So in 1861, serfdom will be abolished. And when it will be abolished, who will, if this is called the emancipation of the serfs, if the vassal loses the serfs, does it affect his economic status or economic, what we call as production capacity? Yes. A vassal would not want a peasant or a serf to go. Now, what basically happens after 1861 is that now the vassal serf relationship does not exist. But I have been for 5 to 6 centuries, for example, 2 centuries, for example, 200 years, generation after generation, my people have been serfs. So would I have any form of savings, any form of money which I have, any form of land which I own? No. I have nothing. So what these landlords did was that they said to the now peasants that you buy the land on which you used to cultivate. They say, what will you do? You buy this land. But the peasant used to say, how will I repay you? So he said basically EMIs, which are called redemption payments, that you redeem your land by paying the paying the landlord monthly or seasonally, whatever it may be. Now tell me one thing: would land be cheap? Would land be cheap? No. Very good. So basically, now the peasant goes into a debt trap. Goes into a debt trap because now he's in economic bondage. He has nowhere else to go, so he buys a very big tract of land, but that land is expensive. So if he gains, for example, 100 rupees a month, close to 80 rupees is basically something he has to pay to the landlord as redemption payment. So while lord vassal or vassal serf relationship was social and economic bondage, both, social bondage is gone, but now the economic bondage is there. So in a way, has the landlord preserved his interest by introducing redemption payments? Yes. So in a way, the position of the serf doesn't change, or the peasant doesn't really change. The name changes, but the position remains the problem. So if I am a peasant in Russia at this point of time, I am frustrated because I came out of a system which was there for centuries. Now I go into a system where my generations after will keep on paying to the same landlord now money because of the redemption payments. So if I try to create a certain picture, which is that geographically Russia is vast, but the vastness of empire is also problematic. Politically, the Tsar is all powerful, and Russian empire projects a lot of power and strength. Socially, peasants and artisans are under distress, plus aristocracy enjoys power, but common people are suffering. Does peasant get salary during serfdom? No, nothing, zero. It's a social bond. Do you give salary to your slaves? No. So, in a way, Russia has a certain image, but it is a non industrial agrarian country with Tsar as absolute power. Now, anybody has any issue in what is written on this slide? Anybody has any issue on this slide? Aristocracy enjoys power, but common people are suffering. What is the issue in this? Non-industrial power, non-industrial power, agrarian country. Czar projects a lot of power, and let's see. Well, we'll argue Russification made sure that ethnicity was not a problem for the empire. For the empire. So very simply, when we talk about Russia, it has a certain type of climate does support agriculture, the Western European sector. The point is, what was the motive behind abolishing serfdom? Because serfdom is an inefficient system. So you try to, because the West was changing, they were trying to industrialize. So the prerequisite to industrialization is this only. What is the last point? Peasant and artisans are under distress. Or aristocracy enjoys power, and that is the basic point. People suffer, aristocracy. Have we seen this type of situation in some other country in Europe? We have France. France was also like this. The old system was problematic. So you can see that the recipe remains the same. So this is not from where the question is going to come. The question is, if we understand this, now one thing is very clear, that in Ottoman Empire we saw that the change came from the ethnicity, the problem of nationalism. But if you look at it, nationalism will not be a problem for Russia. So if it is not that, then what changed Russia? What happened in 1905 that Russia had to change and have the October Manifesto? So can I now transition to the second part of the discussion, which is, this is all to tell you that Russia will never have a problem as the Ottoman Empire or the other European powers. Nationalism is not a problem for Russia. Then how did Russia change? For change, there needs to be a cause. In all of this, you don't find a cause. This is just the situation. Can we now transition to the second part of the discussion? Okay. Now, the way Russia changed or was forced to change before 1861 serfdom, after 1861 redemption payments, socially economically bonded, later only debt trap. Now, the way Russia changed was repeated humiliation and hollowness of power was shown. See, if I argue, or if I say that between 1800 and 1900, the only thing which Russia was actually successfully able to do was to basically humiliate itself. That statement is going to be right or wrong. That statement is right or wrong. It is a correct statement. Because beat the Crimean War 1853-56 or beat the Great Eastern Crisis 75-78, in both contexts, Russia lost. And more than that, whenever the British got involved, Russia had no standing. Now, if I'm a Russian who's been beaten up by the Russian police in the name of the Tsar, and my country loses twice to Britain, will I now start to question why am I getting beaten up by the police? And will I question the fact that they talk big, but they have nothing to show for? So this century is basically called the century of humiliation. Here is the Tsar who is having very big processions. He's saying, I'm the most powerful, this, that. Now, but when it comes to fighting wars, as soon as Russia sees Britain entering, it leaves the building itself. So by 1900, one thing was becoming evident. By 1900, one thing was becoming evident. Russia was not what it projected. And the people were now asking questions. Were asking questions that, okay, if you are so mighty, then why don't you show it to us? But the turning point is going to come. In 1904, 1905. Can I discuss that? Very good. See, till 1900 or by 1900, we'll talk about that when redemption will be later. A person of Slompin is going to do it. By 1900, the eastward expansion, one second, the westward expansion ambition of Russia was checked by Austria, Germany, Ottomans, but specifically Britain and France. They made sure that westward expansion was not possible. No, this is not Ritika. This is still 1904-5. 1914-17 they will exit. So they made sure that westward expansion was not possible. So now the Russians decided to go east. And when we talk about the east, there was one sector which is called Manchuria. This is called Manchuria. Manchuria, though, is very close to the Russian, to the Chinese. It was not claimed by the Chinese directly. Just next to the Mongolian sector, Manchuria is a very fertile area. It's a very fertile area. Now the Russians wanted to control it. However, there was one more power which wanted to do it, which is Japan. Japan, by this point of time, was already dominating in the Korean sector, but they were extremely interested in Manchuria. Now, over Manchuria, the Russians are now against the Japanese. Now, if you look at the Japanese, Japan is just one island, which is just basically one hill, what we call as a mountain range itself. There can be thousands, maybe lakhs of Japan which can fit into Russia. So when we talk about the Russian size, which is a very big empire, the Japanese are a very, very small power. Very small power. They are literally not even 10% of Russia. And now the Japanese and the Russians are fighting over Manchuria. And what we call as the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, the Japanese will defeat the Russians. Will defeat the Russians. And the reason, because the military was concentrated in West, and by the time the Russian military reached the Japanese sector or the Japanese side, the war was already over. And the Japanese very quickly even signed a treaty, or basically had a conference through which internationally they got recognized also as the rulers of Manchuria. Now, this is a problem. Now, this is a problem. See, you get defeated by Britain and France, it makes sense. In cricket, you get defeated by Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, England. These are big countries. And they are cricket playing countries, test playing countries. So people don't say too much. Now you play against Nepal and then you defeat. Then you are defeated. Then people will start to ask questions. And this is basically what has happened for the Russians. Russians have now got defeated by a power which is not even 10% of their size. And the Russo-Japanese War, therefore, the context for change comes from here, because now hollowness of power and strength becomes evident. See, you get defeated by Britain, France, we understand. Britain is the foremost power, the most powerful nation in the world. Okay. But you get defeated by the Japanese, means there's a problem. And basically, the first impetus for change, the first catalyst for change was all the prevailing conditions plus here the catalyst is the Russo-Japanese War. And what you get are protests, demonstrations, call for democracy, plus French Revolution, plus American Revolution, plus Enlightenment. What you get is basically call for democracy, protests, and demonstrations. When they are having difficulty in administering vast empire, why did the Russian king want to expand it further? Well, when you were a child, you had 50 toys. Then next time when you went into the store and your parents said, buy a toy, you said, no, I have already enough toys. I'm not that responsible. 50 is enough for me. Human nature. You want more. You want more, they wanted more. And because of the defeat, the Japanese Russians won't be able to help Serbia against Austria with British ignorance. Don't Alok bring in the first World War here. We are quite far away from the First World War, and this is totally independent to it. So very simply, protest, demonstrations, and call for democracy start. Now, there are multiple demonstrations. In the year of 1905, there are multiple demonstrations. Japanese were aggressive. Yes, Japanese were aggressive because of their industrialization. So in 1905, there are demonstrations which are happening. And the Tsar at this point of time is the fool called Nicholas II. Is a fool called Nicholas II. Now, when it comes to solutions, when it comes to the fact that what is the solution? Call, not lol. When it comes to solutions for demonstrations, Tsar Nicholas II only has one solution, which is shoot the people. They only know one thing, which is shoot. Now, what is going to happen is that on 22nd December, not December, January 1905, there were close to 3,000 to 4,000 protesters in front of the Tsar's palace, protesting for change after seeing the hollowness of the power of the ruler. And Tsar Nicholas II is going to give the shooting orders, shoot at sight. And in this, close to 1,000 people will die. And this moment is called Bloody Sunday. It's called Bloody Sunday. It was a Sunday, 22nd January 1905. It's called Bloody Sunday. And this will be a turning point. This will be a turning point. So basically, the Russo-Japanese war defeat plus prevailing frustrations plus enlightenment, new ideas, and add to it, plus Bloody Sunday. And what you get is that now Tsar Nicholas II is under pressure to do something. And basically, the military generals, they still support the king. They still support the king. But the problem is some form of concession is warranted. And that concession is called the October Manifesto of 1905. It's called the October Manifesto of 1905. And why is the October Manifesto so important? Because it will make Russia from an absolutist monarchy into a constitutional monarchy. He will make Russia, the October Manifesto, therefore, one second. The October Manifesto makes Russia a constitutional monarchy. It allows for political parties to operate. Duma elections will happen. And the most important, civil liberties were given. However, Nicholas II does not want to implement properly. So he was again basically doing a drama. Now this will explain why Britain and Russia will go into a alliance in 1907. That basically the British will argue that the Russians have changed. However, Tsar Nicholas II had no inclination of actually doing anything, but this will invariably pave the way for the October Revolution or the Russian Revolution of 1970, because these political parties, there will rise one political party, the Social Democratic Workers Party, which will thereafter split under the leadership of Lenin, and they will become what we call as the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And that is the Bolsheviks who basically are the architects of the Russian Revolution. But in order to understand the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, Lenin, you need to understand ideologies. You need to understand ideologies and this concept of socialism, communism, and aspects related to that. Now, very simply, what I am going to do now, till this point, does it make sense? Does it make sense? Yes? I am going to consolidate through the PPT. Then we'll talk about ideologies. And then we'll take a break and come back to Russia. So now I'm going back and revising everything with you so that we can thereafter talk about ideology. Now my main agenda is to cover ideologies with you. So Russia on the eve of the revolution, was a very multi-ethnic nation with multiple what we call as ethnicities, and over and above that, the Tsar had followed a policy of Russification through which he had converted all the minorities to Russian language. He confiscated their property. Russian culture was pushed onto them properly. The person who was ruling when things were changing was that Tsar Nicholas II came to power in 1894, but he is literally useless, has no idea how to manage Russia generally. So Tsar Nicholas II himself made Russia constitutional monarchy and became himself the constitutional monarch. Now, if I dig in a little bit further into Russia, you have the aristocrats who enjoy everything. Peasants and workers are the ones who are under distress. They basically embody the same type of anger which was there in France. Peasants were under a very pitiable condition with close to 80% of the population in agriculture itself. In emancipation, before emancipation, there was serfdom till 1861, which is very late. This is the last country to actually abolish serfdom. And once they basically came out of serfdom, they went into long redemption payments. Majority of the peasants lived in poverty, and one third of them were even landless. Workers, on the other hand, very limited industrial. We will not even call it industrial revolution. We'll call it industrialization, and that also bring in a lot of misery for the workers. Between 1912 and 1914, 8,000 strikes were there, and 270 gold mine strikers were just shot. All of them were shot by the police when they were protesting. So very simply, if you add to all of this the rising concept of liberty, fraternity, and the concept of civil liberty in the West, now Russian writers such as Leo Tolstoy or Dostoevsky now started to talk about how the state is not complete. And now the political awakening of the people will happen. They will start to ask for political rights. And that will pave the way for the Russo-Japanese War to happen in 1904, 1905. Russia could not move towards the west, so it had to go towards the east. However, Japanese were already entrenched in Korea and they wanted Manchuria. And therefore, the Russians will not be able to respond the right way because of the inefficient Trans-Siberian Railway. And the Japanese will win this sector and also then go and make the US and UK accept the fact that it rules over this area. And this will be a turning point. Now, the impact of this war is that the hollowness of the Russian claims of power were showcased in front of the world. The divine position of the Tsar at home was destroyed and protests were intensified. The Russians had imperial ambitions which were now checked in the east by Japan, west by Austro-Hungary, and Austro-Hungary or Austro-Germany. And Russia will now try to, in a way, change itself. But with waves of protest happening, there will be multiple moments in which there will be police firings, but one of the most deadliest was the Bloody Sunday event. And now Tsar Nicholas II had to give some concession, and he gave it in the form of the October Manifesto of 1905. Now, issued on 17th October 1905 by Nicholas II, it gave civil liberties to the citizens, created the first Duma, which is a proper parliament, universal suffrage for men in Duma elections, and the point was, many of the demands were not fulfilled. For example, abolish redemption payments not done, better conditions not done, political prisoners should be leave not done. So very simply, the Tsar had no intention to sticking to the manifesto. It was just to make the people, in a way, calm down. It's a concession to literally calm down the people. Now, the point which you need to understand here is, with radical political parties appearing across the different what we call as Russian political landscape, those the Tsar never really properly. Duma is not the name of election. Duma is the word for parliament in Russian. The point is that the Russians, by doing what they did, which is Nicholas II, by doing this universal suffrage means that all males were given suffrage, which is the right to vote. By that was also rigged later. By creating the Duma, it allowed political parties to rise, and that will be the catalyst for the second change which will come in Russia. And as it is, you can see that when the first Duma tried to take a little bit power away from Tsar, he dissolved it. Second Duma again tried to do it, again dissolved. It is only the third and the fourth Duma, which basically was conservative, did not touch Nicholas II's power, that actually survived. And the second and the the third and the fourth Duma was under a prime minister. His name was Slompin. Slompin, whatever you want to call him. He did want to modernize Russia a little bit. He's actually the one who abolished the redemption payments also. He's also the one who actually abolished the redemption payment concept. He tried to do a lot of good things for Russia. He will abolish the redemption payments when he will be the prime minister, third and fourth Duma. He will give a lot of these peasants land in the Siberian sector. They will become very big peasantry called the kulaks. Then industrial growth will also increase just before the First World War. But what will happen is that at this point of time, the Tsar came under the influence of one personality, very famously known as Rasputin. Rasputin murdered or got Slompin murdered by the secret police. And till 1916, Rasputin actually was a very useless but important advisor of Tsar. And he will himself get assassinated in 1916. And thereafter, there will be some sanity which will come in Russian politics. That is not the point. The point is that what we've discussed till this point is to understand how can political parties rise in Russia. We established Russia. We established the first catalyst of change. We established how Russia is going to have now Dumas and how political parties will come. But within these political parties, there will be what we call as socialist parties. Now, I want to discuss socialism, Marxism, and communism with you if the first part of the political story is clear. Once we've covered ideologies, we take a break and then we go back to Russia to understand the Russian Revolution. Yes? Okay. Now, I need your attention. I need your attention because this is an important section. As it is, there's a lot of uh, you can say misinformation. Most of the people don't know what they mean by left, right, or what socialism and actually communism means. Now, first things first. First things first. This is the portion out of which you can't basically get a GS level question, which is discuss Marxism with us. Discuss Marxism. What is socialism? What is communism? These questions are optional level because Marxism is not that straightforward as I will basically show you. And there are people till today who are decoding what Marx wanted to argue. Departments working to understand what socialism and communism is. And very simply, from a UPSC aspirant, you can't expect him or her to write a exam based question which talks about within 250 words Marxism. That is not possible. But this discussion is important because the world is going to be obsessed with socialism between 1917 and 1992. So you need to understand what it is actually. The first thing you need to understand that the question from this area is more or less very unlikely. Now, the second thing is what I am going to discuss with you is in no way exhaustive. Because when you say Marxism, which is an ideology, Marx, what Karl Marx said, there is no one type of Marxism. There's vulgar Marxists, there are structuralist Marxists, there are non-structural Marxists, there are Althusserian Marxists, Perry Anderson, British School of Marxism. There are multiple people multiply interpreting the understanding of Marx, and therefore Marxism, what I am going to tell you, is to cater for the examination. So I'll be happy to share books if you want to read. I have done myself 6 to 7 months within our MPhil and within our masters. We understand Marxism, but that is a 6 to 7 month long process. That out of that, I am giving you what really matters for the purpose of the examination. So do not think that Marxism is what is I'm telling you. Marxism is much bigger than what we actually are going to understand. If these 2 points are clear to you, then I would like to move and discuss who is Karl Marx and what is the concept itself. Okay. Now, firstly, never use Marxism, socialism, and communism, and specifically Marxism and communism and Marxism and socialism interchangeably. Because Marxism is an ideology and socialism and communism is part of that ideology. So basically, it's like saying that Satyagraha and Ahimsa are the same thing. Or Gandhian Satyagraha and Ahimsa are the same thing. Which basically makes no sense. Because Satyagraha is not just Ahimsa and other things also. Ahimsa is part of Satyagraha. Same way, socialism and communism is not Marxism, but they're part of Marxist ideology. This is the first major mistake which most of the students do, which is not understand the difference between these words. Now, a person called Karl Marx, born into the German states, he was born during the Industrial Revolution period. and he tried to understand the Industrial Revolution. His ideologies, his understanding was too radical for the German states, and he was thrown out of Germany, and he met his very good friend Engels in London, and he settled in the UK, in England. And one thing should be very clear to you, that Karl Marx did not have a lot of money. But when he did reach London, he reached London when the Industrial Revolution was at its peak, which means that he saw the death, the destitution, the plight, and the way capitalism was operating at the grassroots level. It is believed that Marx didn't even have a coat which he could wear to the library, and he used to borrow everything from Engels. And Engels' father was actually an industrialist. So he understood the industrial side also well, the capitalist side, because his friend was the son of a capitalist. And Karl Marx, on the other hand, was a person who was looking from both sides. He was looking at the peasants also, at the workers also, and second, as what Engels was gaining out of it. So one thing is very, very clear. When Karl Marx is talking about capitalism, he actually was there to see how capitalism rose to become what it is today. And that is why he tried to, in a way, predict the future, and also, in a way, tried to explain history. Now, the context of Marx is important because people tend to argue, why is he the specialist? He's the specialist because he understands the thing, what we call as a way of looking at it firsthand. He has seen the Industrial Revolution. Now, if this is clear, I want to go into terminologies and how Marx explains all of history and what is going to happen in history in his understanding. Based on the Etienne Brumaire, based on the Communist Manifesto, based on the Das Kapital, I am now going to basically discuss Marxian ideology with you, which is the basic concept. Can we start our discussion? Because now I want you to concentrate with me. Can we start our discussion? Yes, sir. Okay. Now see, Marx used two words, which is his basic two words: mode of production and means of production. According to Marx, mode of production was the prevailing economic production system or economic system, and means of production was the basic unit of labor or basic unit needed to run the mode of production. The mode of production. So a very simple example of this would be, capitalism is factories. So that is the mode of production. So the mode of production which we live in today is called capitalism. And the means of production was then what? If the mode of production is capitalism, means of production is what? The mean of production, according to Marx's means of production, is labor. Not, you are mixing up factors of production with the concept of means of production. Try to understand this point. Mode is the prevailing system, capitalism. So the basic unit of labor in capitalism is labor or worker. This is a very important point you need to understand. It's not confusing. Kuraku, I've not even started to complicate it. It's a very straightforward concept. Don't tell me factors of production. Stop putting in your modern economics into this. So, very simply, mode is capitalism. So, means is labor. If this is going to prove if you understand or not. If car is the mode of production, what is the means of production? Means cannot be machines because machines also need labor. Very good, Vedshri, Purva, Kishan. Labor, steel, person who made it. You are saying driver, the person. I give you a car. I give you the best car in the world. I give you the driver also. Can a car move without the fuel? So the means of production is fuel, petrol. Understand this point. Understand this point. Everything else, the steering wheel, the driver, everything else is helping the fuel run the system. So without labor, there is no capitalism. So mode of production is prevailing economic situation, economic system. Means of production is what is the basic unit of labor which is needed to run that. In Marxian ideology, it is always the human element. So we don't have to do a thesis here. But without driver, car cannot move. But if you have a driver, car will move without fuel. You tell me, which is more important, the fuel or the driver? You tell me. The fuel. If you don't have the petrol in the car, what will the driver do? Go into the tank and run the engine. So car is the mode. Thereafter, the way the car works is because of fuel. If the car is EV, then it will move without fuel. So EV car works on air. हवा भर देते हैं उसमें और चलने लगता है वो. Come on, yaar, your logic is EV cars need electricity. So if you are trying to be dumb, that's a separate issue altogether. But EV car runs on electricity. Or you just sit there and the car automatically works. Then the global warming is done only. No issues. Everything should work like सबको EV कर दो बस. Write EV on the car and it will work. So try to understand this point. The straightforward point is, I don't need to prove to you this. We are not having a debate. This is what Marx said. So yes, today's industry is substituting labor. But will the machine work without the coding of an engineer? Or the machine will automatically work? So isn't the machine still a factor of production and the engineer or the labor which is the means of production? Machines don't work in themselves. Yes, they can reduce the number of labor, but it will not eliminate it. Again, not having a conversation with you, I'm telling you. So don't try to counter me, because I am not going to get countered, because I am telling you what Marx said. So you may think differently. Sure, that is your opinion. That is your ism. We are talking about Marxism. Mode and means of production in Marxian ideology is how the system works. It will mostly be human element. So can I now move to the second part, which is how does Marx actually divide all of history and what is his projection for the future? Okay. So it means mode, whatever you want to do, you do. But in Marxian ideology, capitalism, labor is the way it works. Car, fuel, factory, labor, that is the way it works. Factors of production are different. Means of production are different. Don't give me NCRT level or modern, any random book base, because in modern terms, we tend to interchangeably use factor and means. But in Marxian ideology, means is a very specific term which he uses. Okay. How Marx was registered to Russia? He was not even related to Russia, had nothing to do with Russia. Let me first tell you what it is. Now, what Marx argued was that, see, if you are in pain, if you are under distress, you want that thing to stop, or you want the light at the end of the tunnel. I tell you that for 50 years you have to study for UPSC, and then maybe 51st year you will clear UPSC. You will literally stop because you don't see light at the end of the tunnel, and there's a misery which is there. So now Marx wanted to show to the people that capitalism is not where we will stop, but there is something greater and bigger which is waiting beyond capitalism. So, in order to argue that, this is called it, it's not a good thing, but Marx did it, which is called economic determinism, or the dialectical materialistic view of history. Now, there are three words which I've used with you, or I've used, but I don't want to give you a very detailed understanding of that. Dialectical materialistic view of history. Dialectical means what we call as dvand or contradiction, which is that there's always a certain type of internal contradiction in a system. Materialistic means that, or historical materialism is basically understanding everything through the lens of economics. Marxist teacher was Hegel. Hegel was an idealist. So what Hegel argued was change comes in history because of ideas. But his student Marx argued no, change comes through when there is economic change. So the driver for Hegel would have been ideas, but for Marx it was the concept of economic materialistic change. So he argued that ideas don't, Hegel argued ideas change the material world. But Marx said no, your economic status changes your ideas, which is technically in a way true. If you are a beggar and I go and talk to you about how the crypto market is going up, you will actually, the beggar is going to listen to me. That how cryptocurrency is so volatile, there are issues in the crypto market, Sensex is going up, BSB. No, because his material context does not allow him to digest those ideas. On the other hand, what Marx would say, change his material context, give him money, and he will then automatically change his ideas itself. So Hegel would have argued the other way around, which is dialectical idealism. However, Marx said, no. The economic situation of a person, in a way, changes or what we call as conditions the ideas of people. You don't have to, I'm not writing anything down because this is not a lecture on philosophy or Hegel. I'm just trying to tell you where he's coming from. Whatever I'm writing down is important. These things are extremely complex. It's not that just a Marx thought about these things. There's Durkheim, there's Althusser, there are multiple people who talked about it. Marx is the first one to say about this. So very simply, this may be a revision for PSIR, history and sociology optional, maybe for somebody from anthropology, but I'm trying to basically bring it down to a certain level for GS. So Marx used two words, means and mode of production, and thereafter argued that the capitalist order is also not the full stop or the last stop of this whole concept. He argued that dialectical materialism is working and there will be change. So now he argued, and now please understand, this is the dialectical, this is called dialectical materialistic view of history. Now, what Marx argued was that we were for originally, and it's a very Eurocentric thing also, very only specific to Europe. The first mode of production which ever existed in society was called primitive accumulation, sometimes called primitive communism also, but I don't use that word. Primitive accumulation. This is the mode, and the means was hunting and gathering societies and people, which is that very simply, primitive accumulation was the earliest of history. You accumulate in a primitive way, and hunting and gathering societies used to do it. Then he said that with time came change, and we went into the second mode of production, which may not be true for India, which is the concept of slave mode of production. And this is basically in the context of Roman and Greek context. And here the means was slaves, which is not basically the slaves which you see as black slavery, like how in India you have Dasa Dasi tradition that way. So the first mode of production which ever existed was primitive accumulation. Accumulate through primitive means, which is basically hunting and gathering. Then he said that we moved away from that and went to slave mode of production, in which slaves used to work. But then he said that this system also did not become stable like this and moved forward. And we came to the third mode of production, which we have discussed previously also. The name of that mode was feudalism. And the means is going to be what? If feudalism is the mode, materialistic view of history, then means will be serfs. Very good. Bonded labor. Now, we have already seen how within feudalism itself, there were multiple contradictions. That is the dialectics of it. And feudalism gave way to the mode of production which we live in today, which is capitalism, produced through the Industrial Revolution, means labor. Or the word which he uses quite a lot, proletariat. Proletariat, worker, labor, whatever you want to call, that is the word. Now Marx said that this is not the end. This is not the end because there are three issues in capitalism. Three issues in capitalism. One is its character. Second is called class conflict. And the third is called class consciousness. Now let's try to understand how does Marx explain capitalism. Everybody's following me till this point? Everybody's following me till this point? Yes? Nobody has no issue? Okay. Now, good, great, perfect. This is heavy, but I hope and I think you are following it well. That is. Now, third issue is I'll tell you class consciousness that I'm coming to. Wait. Now, what Marx explained capitalism as a concept of a base and superstructure. Base and superstructure. This is called vulgar Marxism, economic reductionism, it is called. In this, the workers are the base on which the industrialists exist, and at the apex is the state, which is basically capitalist state. So now, according to Marx, very simply, capitalism is inherently exploitative. The base is exploited to produce the superstructure. Inequality and poverty are the most important feature of this system, and the state embodies the interest of the industrialists. Basically, the nation state has a very close nexus with the industrialists. So this system, a worker will never gain anything. As he used to say, he will never bear the fruits of his labor and will never gain anything and only be exploited. However, he argued that change will come because of class consciousness and because of class struggle. Can I discuss class consciousness and class struggle with you? If this is clear, this should be clear. Yes, okay. Now, class now pay attention. State has geographical boundary, it is more tangible, nation is felt, oneness, emotive level. Sure, you're asking me what is the nation state. State exists, nation exists, then only state exists. Okay, now Marx said that the seeds of the revolution, the seeds of the change are within capitalism itself. And for that to happen, the working class had to become class conscious. Now, basically, what Marx argued was that there's a struggle between the base and the superstructure for who will have resources. But he argued that the day the worker realizes that what is common to all of them is the fact that they are exploited, capitalism will never actually survive. I'll give you a very simple example of this and you will realize what he's trying to argue. Now, because you join me at 6 a.m. in the morning, You are part of my class? Yes or no? By virtue of coming to this stream, you are part of my class. Now imagine that, for example, there are 200 people in this class, for example, and we all are going down the street, for example. And when we are going down the street, we all are a class because you have come to class and you joined me at 6, and therefore there is the only connection between you and the other one person standing to you next to you is that you are just here because you came to the class. Now what happens is that there are goons here, thugs, whatever you want to call him, gunde hai. Now what they do is that they, for example, pick up Sachin. When they target Sachin and they start to beat up Sachin, for example, we all look towards these goons beating up Sachin, but we don't do anything because though we are part of the class, you have no connection to Sachin. You don't care about Sachin. Now what happens is next day, Sachin is not targeted, Madhur is targeted. Then, for example, Anjali is targeted, then Yash is targeted, then Abhishek is targeted, then Mahima is targeted. One after the other, the victim changes, but the episode keeps on going on. Now, once all of you are beaten up by the goons, now it is again Sachin's turn. And now, when you are walking down the street, as soon as they pick up Sachin, you all remember how you were beaten up. And this time, when the goons pick up Sachin, you don't ignore, but you respond, which is called collective action. And when all of us respond, at that moment, we have moved beyond being just a class to become class conscious. We are now, yes, the concept of class, class for itself to class in itself. You were just a class because you were part of my system, but now you all have a connection, which is the shared experience with the goons. Now let me bring it into Marxian perspective. What Marx argues is that till the workers do not realize that what is common to them is not competition. See, all of you are competing with each other. All of you are competing with each other for the handful of positions which will come from UPSC. You are competing. You are competing for jobs. You would have seen certain images in which there was a walk-in interview. There are lakhs of students trying to go in. All of them are competing with each other. But that is the point. That is the point. Capitalism pits the worker against the worker. But over a period of time, you will realize that what is common to you is not the competition. What is common to you is the fact that you all are struggling against the same system. You all are basically getting exploited by the same system. So when the day you will realize that the experience which is common to all of us is not that we are capitalistic workers, is that the capitalist system exploits us. The working class will become class conscious, and through collective action, they will now start class struggle. And this is basically what Marx said in a very dramatic fashion, that when the workers of the world unite, which is going beyond their national boundaries, when the workers of the world will unite, then comes the socialist revolution. And capitalism will change, and you will have the next mode of production, which is called socialism. But the basic point I'm trying to argue here is within Marxian understanding, within Marxian understanding, this is inherent to capitalism. Capitalism will always give rise to working class. It will give rise to classes till the point the classes are within themselves fighting with each other. Then, till that point, basically, the capitalist system will actually survive. As soon as the workers will realize that we should not be fighting with each other, because fighting with each other is only strengthening the superstructure, and we all realize that the problem is not us, that we are incompetent of clearing the different positions, but it is a system which has been geared in such a way, that day what will happen is you will transform from a worker to a working class member, and that day class will become class conscious, and that day the workers of the world will unite and topple the capitalist system. Does this make sense? Because then I want to talk about socialism and communism. Okay, perfect. Now see, what was the system at which we were there was capitalism. Capitalism inherently exploitative. State works for the industrialists. Inequality and workers' distress. What Marx argued, Alina, what I'm writing, what will happen is if I write too much, then you will say, sir, do I need to learn it? So I'm only writing the points you need to learn. Don't worry. So, what Marx argued was this will lead to class conflict, will in turn will lead to class consciousness, and that will lead to class struggle. And what will come is what we call as the proletariat revolution, and a new mode will come, which is socialism. Now, what is socialism? Mode of production, socialism. Now, see, what socialism is in Marxian ideology. The state which embodied the interest of the industrialist will be replaced by a state which is worker oriented, basically a state controlled by workers. The main task of this state is going to be redistribution of property and equality. And more than that, socialism is a transitionary phase to the last mode of production, which basically Marx argued was that after socialism, once everyone will become equal, the state will dissolve itself and we will enter into the last mode of production, which is called communism, which is classless, stateless, egalitarian society. Now, please, I have to say something right now, very important. See, socialism can exist, which is the fifth mode, but communism is a utopia. Communism is literally a utopia. Utopia means a manghadant kahani. Don't ask me how will communism work, because communism can't work. In this world today, there is no communist country. There is no country which has ever been communist. Not even the USSR, which was called the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, they themselves were not even socialist. The point is that communism cannot exist, will never exist, and hasn't existed. However, parties call themselves as Communist Party of India, Communist Party of China, because they want to show that their ultimate goal is communism. But there are, as you would see, there are two types of parties which you will see: socialist parties, communist parties. Socialist parties are little bit mild. Communist parties are hardcore, more radical. So very simply, Marx is asking for class consciousness. If that can't happen, then communism can't. No. See, socialism can exist without revolution also. Can you give me an example of a country which is socialist without revolution? India. India. We are a very good example of how socialism can exist without the concept of what we call as a communist revolution or a socialist revolution. What is true communism? True communism is everyone is equal, everybody has equal money, everybody has house, everybody has car, there is no state, there is no class. You want 1 kg of rice, you will get 1 kg of rice. You want 100 gram more, you will not be given. Everybody goes to the what we call as communal factories. They work there, they produce for everyone. There is no concept of surplus, there is no concept of private property. Everything is state, everything is owned by everyone. That is the problem. That is the problem. It is everything having everything. That is the problem. So true communism is a totally different concept itself. It cannot exist. It cannot exist. That is the point. So don't try to make it work, because it will not work. So very simply, India is a good example of what we call as socialism, and which is called try to understand this. This is why UPSC wants you to study this also. Very simply, it is good to be a socialist, but not a communist. Try to understand this point. It is good to be a socialist, but it is not good to be a communist. See, if you are a socialist, are there any clauses in our constitution which encourages the state or the citizens of India, specifically the state, to be socialist? Can anybody tell me the article numbers? You're very good in polity. There are, Sachin, known. Yes, the answer is yes. Tell me the article numbers. Yes, DPSP. Sure. What is the article number? Not the preamble. Sorry. 39 BNC, redistribution of property, non-concentration of wealth in few hands. See, if you are a socialist, which India is also, what do you want? You want workers' welfare? You want peasant welfare? You want people to be equal? You want people's welfare to happen? You want a state which embodies the interest of the common people? Then what is the problem? What is the problem in that? Land reforms was a proper socialist move. What is the problem in you thinking or working as a government servant? You are at the end of the day a civil servant. People forget that you will become an IAS officer, sure, but you will be called a civil servant. You're the servant of the people. And if an IAS officer wants equality in his district and he works for the welfare of the farmers, of the people who do not have money, what is the problem in that? What is the problem? Is there a problem? It's taking you time to digest this. I'm not getting it. What is the issue? What is the issue in you being a socialist when you want to work for the people? What is it to mean to be a socialist? You are a socialist when you work for the people, when you work to make the society more equal, when you want to remove inequality, when you are welfare oriented, when you want to give equal opportunity. If you truly believe in Article 15 and 16, then what is the problem in India being, or you being, a socialist? This is the problem that we face today, that the people who talk about socialism don't know what socialism actually is. We are what we call as Fabian socialists. So Subhash Chandra Bose was a socialist, Nehru was a socialist, and the fact of the matter is, the simple straightforward point is, Bhagat Singh, HSRA, Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. The fact is, the later revolutionaries all believed in socialism because that is what India believes in. So it's not that Nehru forced socialism on everybody. HRA became HSRA. Nehru and Bose were part of the socialist faction of the Congress itself. Then what is the issue? Because why am I having this conversation? Because today people who write messages on WhatsApp don't know what they're saying. So if equality is not what you are working for as an IAS officer, if you are not true to the provisions of the Indian Constitution, then what is the purpose of becoming an IAS officer? You will very, very proudly say in the interview, I want to work for the nation. The nation has given me quite a lot. I want to do back to it. Nation means industrialist. Nation means industrialist. It means the people of India. It means the people of India. So if you don't want to work for the people of India, then what is the point of all of this? So understand this point, that it is not that socialism has always a negative connotation. That is why our constitution embodies the concept of socialism. Ironically, most of the religions in India, most of the thinkers in India, most of the values in India are about the concept of socialism. We argue Vasudeva Kutumbakam, right? That the world is one brotherhood. We were the first to say that. Marx said later, now the workers of the world should unite. We are already saying that very simply, we all are together. So is becoming Robin Hood called socialism? That is the problem. No. If when you will become an IAS officer, you will go and loot an industrialist and give the money and distribute it into the farmers. That is what an IAS officer does. No. When money will be allocated to your district, who will you keep in the mind? Who will you keep in the mind? This is why UPSC wants you to study world history. Who will you keep in the mind? The people of your constituency or the people of your district, the poorest of the poor. Not that, okay, this will impact this section. This is called the concept of socialism. See, socialism has meant a lot of things and has been a lot of things. But in Marxian socialism, this is what actually it means. For Marx, socialism was not the end, it was the means to an end, which was a transitionary phase which leads to a society which has no divisions and has pure equality. I am still telling you, no country in this world is 100% socialist. No country in this world is 100% communist. And to have a socialist streak, you don't want to call it socialism, but if you want to argue that you want to work for the people, then very simply you are a socialist. You like it, you don't like that tag, you are a socialist. That is the basic point you need to understand. The most of the answers which you write, try to understand this point. Most of the answers which you write in the ethics examination, झूठ सच जो भी लिखते हो, वो just pretend whatever it may be, you are writing a socialist answer. Case study is always there. Then they will give you a dilemma. That dilemma is what? Should you help the people or should you help the lobbyists? And the answer is also always what? Help the people. That is a very good case study answer. So please try to understand this point, because I want to now just give you a break before we move to Lenin and Marx. What is Marxism? Marxism, imagine a peasant or a worker listening to Marx in 1850 when he says to the worker that your plight will end. That is why Marx was so influential. Tell to a worker that he will not sleep hungry tomorrow. That ideology will obviously become very, very popular. And what Marx said was capitalism is a transition to two more modes of production. Capitalism inherently is exploitative. It is based on inequality. It is based on haves and have-nots. And this will lead to class conflict, leading to the rise of socialism. Socialism will be a mode of production in which the concept in India, the best PSUs. What are PSUs? Public sector undertakings are socialists. Socialist impulse in the Indian society or the Indian economy. The fact is that the workers will now have public sector. The government will control the property of the industrialist. They will not produce for profit, but they will produce for the people. The task of the state will be to make every worker equal. I have 10 houses, you have 2 houses, the next one has no house. Then what will happen is our extra houses will be taken and redistributed to everyone else. Now, if you don't like this idea, it is because you are in a way privileged. When you are a have, then you will always become uncomfortable over this idea that my private property will be taken. But that is basically what the concept of socialism is. Everybody should have equal opportunity. Everybody should have equal, what we call as money. Everybody should be equal. And the day every 100% equality will be achieved, this task of the state will be done and communism will come into existence. Classless, stateless society. Does this make sense? Because then I will just read from the PPT and then I would like to go towards Marx and Lenin, because there's a difference between Marx and Lenin. Okay. Communism curbs freedom. How? How does communism curb freedom? Raghav, explain yourself. You are basically talking about market-based choice, because you can buy between Colgate and Pepsodent, or you can buy between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, who are basically same thing, only the brand is different. You call it choice or you call it freedom. That is an illusion of freedom. You really do have freedom today. The illusion of freedom in consumer market is a totally different concept. So you see, this is what is capitalism is free. speaking from within you. We have embodied, we have internalized capitalism so much that it seems to be weird. अरे ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है? How can there be 100% equality? But say it to a person who has nothing, and he will actually become in very, very, very very influenced by that concept. Isn't that the Marx saw state to bring down inequalities? It has to be the state which will bring down inequality. Bring down means during colonial era choice. No, no, not that. He's not talking in that sense. Sociology is a subset of history only. So what I'm teaching is very relevant for all PSIR and all optionals in that regard. Okay. Now, I just want to discuss this point because I want to consolidate and then come back and go to Russia. See, socialism is a transition from a bourgeoisie dominated state to a state which embodies the workers' interest, democratic socialism. Socialism, social organizations are controlled and regulated by the government so as to ensure welfare and the equality of the people. Means of production are collectively owned, which is PSU, government owning for you, and socially owned and not the property of a private individual. All of this is to transition to communism, which is the ultimate goal of the proletariat revolution. Classless, stateless society, dismantle all privileges. People work in communal factories, produce goods which are distributed to whoever needs them. Thereafter, there are different types of socialism also. One is called market socialism. A very good example of market socialism is Amul. You know cooperatives? Do you understand cooperatives? What is a cooperative? Why are we considering Marx thought as an ideology, as he himself against idealism? Abhishek, now you are trying to be Hegel. Yes, he became what he did wanted to challenge. What a contradiction! Such a pity. What should I say to it? Isms are problematic. Marxian ideology is Marxism. End of story. So yes, you understand cooperatives. Yeah, cooperatives are an example of market socialism, which is that the state and the workers come together and own the property, own the organization, and the quantity and the quality of everything is decided by the workers and the state. So this is called market socialism. Market socialism, Amul is a very good example. That the farmer, that the producers of milk also have a certain stake, and on the other hand, there's a board which works for them and takes decisions for them. Then you have what we call in India democratic socialism, which is Fabian socialism. There was a school, British socialist school called the Fabian socialistic model. And in Fabian socialism, a very important concept is there. Fabian socialists say that a revolution is not always needed. Democracy can be used to achieve the social reform goals. So this is what Nehru used to embody quite a lot, which is basically use democracy as a means of change, which is Fabian socialism. Thereafter, there is nothing called Gandhian socialism. Those are two very different things. Gandhi and Marx are different. Thereafter, the most what we call a supercharged form of socialism, which goes towards communism in that regard, is called libertarian socialism, which is no bureaucracy, no hierarchy, private property, all private property becomes public goods, and there is no one to be compelled to work. Associations will replace the state, and there will be no authoritarian institutions. Basically, market socialism and Fabian socialism moves towards libertarian, and then it moves towards communism. So very simply, before I give you a break and we go back to Russia, please understand 2 to 3 points very clearly. Marx argued about a certain future. His concepts became very popular because he was giving the people a means out of this misery which they were in. He argued that when capitalism will reach its highest point, class struggle will lead to the proletariat revolution, and that in turn will lead to socialism, that in turn will lead to communism. Socialism is state exists but works for equality. Communism is no state, no class, no concept of division. Now, before I give you a break here, very simply, very simply, The prerequisite for Marx for a socialist revolution was that the industrial revolution should reach to the highest point. Please understand this point. Marx argued that industrial revolution, when it reaches its peak, then the socialist revolution happens. This is a prerequisite for Marx, and that is why he said that the first socialist revolution will happen in England. But he was proved wrong, because what is going to happen in Russia will shock the world, because Lenin is going to change Marx's ideology and use it to win power, which we'll talk about once we are back. Can I give you a break here? Yes or no? And then we go back to Russia. Yes? We come back at 8:20. When we come back at 8:20, 1 hour burst, we will discuss Russia, Lenin, and what we call as the difference between Marx and Lenin. Who is Lenin and what is the concept itself? Okay. See you at 8:21. Okay, welcome back. No, Deepika, that's technically not true. Uh, you can't say disinvestment is a regression on the path of socialism. If PSUs are becoming useless, then why not? Why not? Well, Anjali, salute to her. Uh, Leftist, rightist, the people who want change, radical leftist, comes from the Jacobians. Rightist, status quoist, conservative, rightist, comes from the Girondinists. If everyone's here and still alive, can we go back to Russia? Can we say privatization is the way to capitalism? Privatization is capitalism. Okay. See, for someone who wants to revise this portion, on YouTube, there was something called, on our channel, there's something called the knowledge series. One of you, please, if you could Google it as I'm speaking. Knowledge series, if you go into world history, there would be a video by me, Marxism. Even if you just type Marxism on YouTube, Marxism, Byju's, it will come. It is a knowledge series, world history, Marxism. It's a 30-minute video, and everything which I've told you, I've summarized within the 30 minutes. So it's available to you at any time. You can see this recording also if you want to. And just watch it if you want to revise. That's the only thing. Towards competition between nations, projecting 39 minutes. Yeah, 39 minutes. You can send me the link. I'll make it what we call as public. Raghav has said it. Okay. So projecting their better GDP. Yes, it is all capitalistic, what we call as competition. Okay. Now, now, okay. Now let's go back to Russia. Now in Russia, what happened was that because of the October Manifesto, a party rose which is called the Social Democratic Labour Party. It's called the Social Democratic Labour Party. But now something very interesting is going to happen. Something very interesting is going to happen. See, Marx said, which will come first, industrial revolution or socialist revolution? According to Marx, what comes first? Very good. Industrial revolution reaching its peak is prerequisite for the socialist revolution. So what Marx argued was socialism is second, first industrial revolution, which is that only when the industrial revolution will reach its peak, then socialist revolution will happen. Now, if I'm frustrated by the government which I have, and I'm not an industrial country, and I'm now a political party, is this path really very easy or very quick? So, for example, for a country like Russia, this path is not easy. This path is not easy, which is that Marx first industrial revolution, Russia will become an industrial power, then it will go for socialist revolution. Like you, a person called Vladimir Lenin also thought the same. that कि इतना टेंशन कौन पालेगा? Who will go for industrial revolution, then socialist revolution, then we will go for a proper socialist society? No. Lenin created his own understanding, which we call as Leninism, and looking at the political situation of Russia when Nicholas II is more or less useless, you can understand what Lenin argues is socialist revolution can happen first, and then we will go for industrial revolution. Now, the Social Democratic Labour Party got divided over this issue on what should be the path for the revolution. One were the Marxists and the other one were the Leninists. The people who are following Marxists were in minority. So they were called the Mensheviks. Menshevik means minority. And the people who were following Lenin were called the Bolsheviks, which is nothing but means majority. Now, the point you need to understand here is that Lenin or Leninism is inherently flawed. See, industrial revolution to reach its peak has to have capitalism. For capitalism to be there needs to be exploitation. For exploitation of workers, then only the base and superstructure will come into existence. It is once base and superstructure reaches a certain point, tipping point, that class struggle starts. Lenin says no. I can go for a socialist revolution first and then go for industrial revolution. But if you will become a socialist first, then how can there be pure industrial revolution? Basically, what Lenin is arguing or Leninism is arguing is that we will go for socialism first and then bring industrial revolution. But how can capitalism exist in its pure form within socialism? But if I look at the time scale, who can bring change quickly, Marxists or Leninists? Marxists or Leninists? Leninists. The people who follow Leninism, they can just go and topple the government and say, we are socialists, now let's go for industrial revolution. See, what I mean to say very simply is people tend to argue that when Lenin captured power in 1917, which is basically the Russian Revolution, Lenin had already made sure that USSR, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, which will come after the existence of a civil war, which I will tell you, would never survive or actually be stable. Because Lenin's pretext was wrong itself. So what the Bolsheviks were basically frauds. Understand this point. Mensheviks actually made sense because they were the ones who were following pure Marxism. Lenin, specifically Stalin, had no idea how to make this work. So their basic thing was, let us reach the examination and then we'll figure out how to answer the questions. Marxists are, let us study first and then we will write the examination. And rather, Lenin was, let's first reach the exam center. And thereafter, we will figure out what to write in the exam. So very simply, because Russia was in such a position that the industrial revolution was not immediate or could not have immediately, Lenin reversed Marxist understanding. Are you understanding the larger concept here? I'm already telling you here that Russia, when it will become Russian Empire to USSR, USSR was never going to work. Never going to work. Question is, why did he do it? Because tell me one thing, Pooja, tell me one thing, I'm sorry. Tell me one thing. If I know that it will take 100 years to get industrial revolution and my age is 45 and I am power hungry, what will I do? What will I do? I will make up this Manghalant Kahani, this whole concept that yes, industrial revolution can exist within socialism. And basically, this is basically a scam. Leninism is basically a way of capturing power. That is the point you need to understand here. And that, however, if I tell you right now, if I tell you right now, you can clear UPSC first, and then you have to study 1 year, after which UPSC will check are you worthy. Basically, you will get selection first, and then you prove your worth, and you study first and then get selection. Which one will you choose? Which one will you choose? You will choose the one in which you are getting selection first, and then you will figure it out how to clear the exam. So very simply, Lenin is doing that only. Immediately he can go for a socialist revolution. Then we'll see what we need to do. Now, if this is clear, I want to talk about the Bolsheviks and the Bolsheviks, and then move towards the Russian Revolution. I will try to leave you because it's heavy. I'll try to leave you by 8:20, by 9:20 today. So don't worry. I didn't give you a 15 minutes break. I'll leave you early. So don't worry about that. Once I reach a point where I think I can leave you, I'll leave you there. Right? Okay. So I can see fatigue on your faces, though I can't see your faces. I can see it in the way you are replying. So don't worry. I'll leave you early if needed. Right? Okay. So just hang in there. Just hang in there. Okay. Now, in 1912, revolutionary organizations started to develop because of the October Manifesto. And the main revolutionary parties were the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks, and the social revolutionaries. The most popular were the Bolsheviks, and Bolsheviks had very charismatic leaders such as Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin himself. Now, Mensheviks literally means minority and opposed the leadership of Vladimir Lenin. They were Marxists and wanted to achieve complete industrialization before moving to communism. On the other hand, you have the Bolsheviks, who literally mean the majority, led by Vladimir Lenin. They were not Marxists and wanted to achieve communist revolution immediately before achieving industrialization. They had a proper full-time revolution program, and their newspaper Pravada was very important in spreading it. On the other hand, they were not really communist. Social revolutionaries were not. They were communists. They were talking about cooperatives and peasants. What is the question, Rahul? Write the question. Rather than giving me all this explanation, give me the question. Yes, but after socialism, what need industrial revolution? This is the question. Write the question and write the whole question. Don't give me incomplete statements. Don't write yes, write the question, yeah. Because I'm waiting for you to write the question. Okay. Karl Marx, Lenin followed the Karl Marx, and basically Leninism is a modified concept of Marxism. Again, Rahul, you're giving me explanation. Give me the question. Bolsheviks wanted communism first, then socialists. Yes. What? Yes, but after socialism, what need the industrial revolution? Because that is the basic point. It is a flawed concept. Yes, I've been building on what you are trying to say only. There's no point of industrial revolution when socialist revolution has already happened. Yes. Okay. Is it important for exam? Russian Revolution. Galaxy, don't give up. Dam mat todo. Don't give up. The question is not going to be about the Russian Revolution. It is going to be about What is the significance of that? And we will discuss that. Okay. Yes, a state when, yes, you're right. Lenin was dumb, totally. When a state becomes socialist, there's no need for industrial revolution. Yes, but the people will not understand that. I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you right now, you give me 50 lakh rupees and I'll get you selection. But I don't guarantee you anything. This is what Lenin is basically doing. When people are desperate, this is what happens. Lenin's argument makes no sense. But we know it because it's called hindsight 2020 or hindsight, which is that we are standing in 2023 and saying Lenin is dumb. But if you say that Lenin is dumb in 1917, it will make no sense because you don't know what will happen or not. What if it works? What if it had worked only? This is a new ideology. So don't think that the people at that point of time were dumb. They were desperate. That's the only point. Okay. So it's very easy to say that it won't work for us, but for them it isn't. Now, Lenin was the founder of the Bolshevik party itself. He believed that the Russians did not need to become industrialized to enter communist phase. Stalin was his deputy. Stalin is the one who actually derailed the whole socialist revolution in that regard. A dictator no less than Hitler himself. But at this point of time, he will be the one who will stabilize Russia after Lenin will die in 1925. Thereafter, Trotsky is another important Bolshevik who was the basically a very important workers activist. He was the one who managed everything on the ground. Now, before I go to February Revolution, since the beginning morning, we've discussed Russia, what is Russia's context, Russo-Japanese War, and the concept of October Manifesto. October Manifesto creates the space for what we call today as political parties, and now rises a political party called the Bolsheviks. They are saying immediate capture of power, and they want to capture power away from Nicholas II. And now we will talk about the February Revolution. But till this point, everybody is following me. You understand ideologies, you understand difference between Marxism and Leninism, and you understand the difference between the concept of how all of this is going to lead to the Russian Revolution. Yes? Okay. In a way, it is a drama. It is totally drama. It is all personal interests. Now, please pay attention. First change came in 1905, and I'll give you a timeline also tomorrow before we start so that you can consolidate. First change came in Russia in 1905. Sunday, Bloody Sunday, in turn leads to October Manifesto. Now, whilst all of this is happening, as soon as Lenin says that we can go for a communist revolution, obviously Nicholas II was never going to let him live. So, though they had become a constitutional monarchy here, Lenin had to flee to Germany because Lenin was a wanted man in Russia. However, the fact of the matter is, Russia will, in between 1905 and 1914, there will be certain reforms which they will try to do, Slompin reform. We know Rasputin was also there. But the point is that the Bolsheviks were becoming more and more influential and popular. Now, in 1914, the Russians will do a blunder. What is that blunder? In 1914, they will respond to the Serbians and enter the First World War. If you remember, I asked you a question. Does Russia gain anything from this war? No. Now you see, Tsar Nicholas II has pushed Russia into a war out of which it gains nothing. Out of which it gains nothing. Rather, left, right, and center, it will lose men, and in the casualties list, it is the highest highest number of casualty will be there of the Russians, because the Germans were able to defeat the Russians from time to time. So between 1914 and 1916, the people are becoming desperate. The people of Russia are becoming desperate, and in 1915 itself, late 1915 itself, Lenin and the Bolsheviks now start to demand that Russia should exit the war. Should exit the war. That there is nothing to be gained out of this war. And the people also started to resonate this feeling that why are we in this unnecessary war? But more than that, Lenin argued a very big thing, which is that he argued that imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. And therefore, he dubbed the First World War as an imperialistic war. Basically, colonial powers fighting among themselves to figure out how they will exploit their own colonies. So it was a war for colonies, it was a war for industrial countries, it was a war for very simply egos. So Lenin argued, the Bolsheviks argued, even the Mensheviks argued that there is no point fighting this war because Russia has nothing to gain out of it. Russia has no colonies generally. So Lenin and Bolsheviks now start to talk about Russia exiting the war. And this period, 14, 15, 16, there's a rising sense about this. Now comes the fateful year of 1917. People are frustrated. Now, one thing I want to point out before I move to the February Revolution. In one book, you will find February. In other book, you'll find March. In some, it will be written February, March, and October, November. This is because Russians used to follow the Julian calendar, and the rest of the world used to follow the Gregorian, the one which we follow. And because there's a time gap between these two calendars, the February Revolution in Russia was basically happening in March according to the world. So don't get flustered when they ask you about February, March Revolution. It's the same thing. Now, 1914 to 1917, the only thing which was happening at this point of time was people's frustration, death and destruction. There was more and more what we call as the people were saying that exiting the war was in the interest of the Russians. Bolsheviks also say this. Now, in the month of February 1917, the protests for this become more and more bigger, intensify like anything. There's an intensification of the protests. And what happens is that now again people are protesting in front of Nicholas II. Basically, Nicholas II has the power to exit the war, but he's not doing it. As it is, he's not winning this war. Nicholas II, the public opinion had totally changed. He will ask his army and the police to shoot the people, but now the police and the army will also not respond. So there are multiple mutinies within the police and the army of the Russians. So the second catalyst for change in Russian history is actually the First World War itself. And Nicholas II was becoming extremely unpopular. They were already a constitutional monarchy. Now the military generals knew that if we can somehow replace Nicholas II, we will be able to at least make sure that the people become a little bit happy. So what the military generals do is that they seek the brother of, or they ask the brother of Nicholas II, his name Archduke Mikhail. They ask Mikhail to come to the throne. They ask Mikhail to come to this throne. However, Mikhail says, I am not a fool. Russia is burning right now, and I don't want to take power. So what is going to happen is that now the military generals have no other option under the pressure of the people, and they will abdicate the throne. Abdicate the throne means abolish the monarchy. And in February of 1917, which is called the February Revolution, Russia is going to become a republic. It's going to become a republic. So in between the war itself, Russia becomes extremely unstable, and Russia has transitioned from a constitutional monarchy to a republic. Now, as soon as Russia becomes a republic, there needs to be a provisional government. Yes or no? If it's a republic and there is no monarchy, there needs to be a provisional government. So the Duma chooses a provisional government, and that is given to a prime minister called Lvov. 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 Now, Lvov has now been given the task of writing an constitution and transitioning to a democratic society. Now, tell me one thing. Was the demand of the people a republic? What was the demand of the people? What was the demand of the people? Exit the war. It was about exiting the war. They wanted to exit the war, right? They didn't say that remove Nicholas II, remove this, remove that. Their demand was exit the war, quit the war, so that we can live in peace. Now, what should have been Lvov's first task? What should have been Lvov's first task? He should have exited the war. However, Lvov does not exit the war because the military generals did not want to. And here, there will be a major contradiction which will rise. Though this provisional government, which is coming out of the Duma, it will lose its credibility very quickly. Basically, the people started to argue that Lvov is nothing but an agent of Nicholas II, because he's not exiting the war itself. However, at the same point of time when Lvov is playing this game, workers' associations in the major cities of Russia had now become very active. The word for worker association in Russian is Soviet. And these Soviets were now becoming active. And more than that, because the people were connected to these Soviets, they were truly representative. So very simply, the February Revolution, which will break out with bread riots in Petrograd, Tsar will give shooting orders. Petrograd troops will say Petrograd is the old name of Saint Petersburg, and there will be a mutiny. They will refuse to fire. There will be mobs burning public buildings, releasing prisoners. Army was intended in protecting the monarchy initially. They asked the Tsar to abdicate in favor of his brother, Grand Duke Mikhail. However, when Mikhail will decline, the provisional government will be formed and Russia will become a republic. Now, as soon as the republic comes into existence, there's a tussle. The tussle is that the provisional government did not exit the war, and more than that, they had deferred elections and the National Assembly, Constituent Assembly making process 2-3 times. At the same point of time, workers' associations were becoming more and more common in these important cities. And it will now become a tussle between the Soviets and the government. Think of it like the panchayat and the parliament. Which is more representative of your interest? The panchayat or the what we call as parliament, which is more connected to the people? Obviously, panchayati Raj institutions, basically panchayats. So these panchayats are nothing but Soviets. They are more connected to the people than the government itself. And therefore, now there's a tussle. So whilst in February of 1917, Russia becomes a republic. Anybody has any issue in understanding this? We're just building up to the October Revolution. Don't worry. You have to go to April and then October. April, August, October. No issues? Okay. Now, in April of 1917, in the same time the US was entering the war, the Germans get a very interesting idea. The Germans were frustrated by the Eastern Front, and they wanted that somehow Russia does exit the war. So what they did was that they smuggled Lenin back into Russia. They smuggled, somehow allowed or gave safe passage to Lenin to go back to Russia. Germany wants an unstable Russia so that front basically stops to exist. And in April, Lenin, when he will come back, he will give what is called the April thesis. In the April thesis of Lenin, he will make 3 demands. First, that Russia should exit the war immediately. Second, that the people should not support and the Bolsheviks should not support Lvov's government. And third, he urged the Soviets to capture power as they were the true representatives of the people and the people should support the Soviets itself. Now, as soon as Lenin will say this, there will be in July a lot of May and July a lot of rioting. Lvov will go after Lenin, and Lenin will then have to flee to Finland. But the damage was already done because the credibility of the government was gone. Now, Lvov still was not ready to exit the war, and the Soviets were becoming more powerful, but the Bolsheviks had not fully filled up the Soviets. But the turning point in this story is going to come in August of 1917. In a very comical fashion, the commander-in-chief of the Russian army, name Kirinlov, whatever you want to call him, what he will try to do is he will try to stage a coup. So he'll bring a lot of tanks and heavy armored vehicles to St. Petersburg or Petrograd. He will be in a jeep in front. But ironically, his army did not want to stage a coup. So whilst he was very happily going in the front with all these armored vehicles behind him, by the time he actually reaches the Duma building, he was the only one standing there. And As soon as he looks around and checks that where are people, there was nobody. He will get arrested for staging a coup. He will get arrested for staging a coup. Now, when people saw that the army is trying to capture power, that the army is trying to capture power, now people's opinion changed totally. They said that rather we should basically support the Bolsheviks because they are ready to capture power also and give Russia the breathing space of exiting the war. And basically between August to October of 1917, Lenin will keep on sending messages to Trotsky, capture power, capture power, capture power. But it is only in October of 1917 that finally the Bolsheviks will be able to win a what we call as majority in Moscow and Petrograd. And in a very dramatic way on 26th October 1917, with the army by their side and having their own paramilitary force together, the Bolsheviks and the Soviets will come together. All the Soviets will come together and they will surround the parliament building. And Prime Minister Lovov will be arrested and the provisional government will be removed. And Lenin will finally come back and now establish the communist state of Russia, which he used to call the socialist state of Russia or communist state of Russia. This is basically the story of the October Revolution. But the October Revolution is very intricately connected to what was happening between April and October. Let me read out to you because still Russia has not become USSR. That story I have to tell you first. Lenin had been exiled by the government. The Germans smuggled Lenin back to Russia, thinking that that it will lead to political instability in Russia. Lenin published his April thesis, which contained his demands. Demands were Bolsheviks should withdraw support from provisional government, Russia should withdraw from the First World War, and all countries should stand by the Soviets because they are the true representatives of the people. Relationship between Lenin and Germany. Lenin was in Germany hiding away from the Russians. So you go to the enemy so as to protect yourself. Thereafter, the road to the October Revolution would be that in July there will be multiple demonstrations. The Soviets were now becoming more and more filled with Bolsheviks, but not at the level so as to capture power itself. The Lovov will argue that Lenin was a German spy. Lenin will then flee to Finland, but he will ask the Bolsheviks to somehow capture power. In August, General Korinlov, the commander-in-chief of the army, will bring in his troops in Petrograd, but his own troops will mutiny and Korinlov is arrested. This episode will show the indiscipline of the army and swung the public opinion towards the decisive leadership of the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks will now emerge as the majority in Petrograd and the Moscow Soviet. Trotsky is now going to become the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. And now Lenin will say the time is right, let us capture power. And on 25th, 26th October 1917, the Bolshevik Red Guard, which is their own small paramilitary fort, and the troops will surround the palace. Provisional government will be arrested. Lenin will return back to Russia. And the Russian Revolution had now taken place. Now you will ask me, what can be the question which can be asked? The question could be, what are the factors which led to the October Revolution? What was the factors which led to the October Manifesto? And the significance of the Russian Revolution. Everything point from this point forward is actually the significance only. But does this make sense to you? Because what I want to do is I want to give you a timeline and then thereafter we can end for today. I want to discuss the Civil War and then give you a timeline. Yes, sir? Okay. Now. Role of Lenin is basically, he's the mastermind of all of this. October Manifesto is first. October is one. First one, last is October Revolution. October Manifesto, October Revolution. Now, please pay attention. 1917, October. Bolsheviks capture power. What do Bolsheviks represent as an ideology? Why own army arrested Kornilov? Because they didn't believe in what Kornilov was doing. They represent socialism. Now, if I am an industrialist who is sitting in, for example, England, in an industrial country like France, Germany, in Spain, Portugal, America, would I be thrilled by the fact that a party which talks about socialism has come to power in Russia? Never. Because industrialists control the state, and now the industrialists will become nervous. That is why, when in December of 1917, Russia left the war after fighting for 4 years, close to 4 years, when they left the war, the British and the French said, punish the Russians because let us kill socialism before it becomes too big. See, understand that the capitalists did not want Bolshevism to spread. Because if Bolshevism spreads, then across Europe, workers' revolutions will happen and governments will go away. And I think you would be very, very, very accustomed to the fact that a politician does not like the fact that he will lose his job. That politicians believe in self-preservation. And their self-preservation was to preserve the industrialists who are giving them money to be in power. So the Russians were basically, after losing 1 crore people, made to basically give up Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania as a form of punishing them. Half of Poland was created out of that area. Trotsky actually was the one who brokered this, and he was literally humiliated by the West because they said, you are a coward, you are exiting the war. They had already fought the war. America has entered the war by this point of time, but the agenda of the West is not that defeat Germany. Everybody knew that Germany is now going to get defeated. Their point was that the snake called socialism has started to rise. Cut the head of socialism before it becomes too big. That is why in December the Russians are made to pay. But once the Russians are ready to give that also up, now they need to find a solution. And this is what the West does the best. The best thing which the West does is they now try to destabilize Russia. What they do is that the Western countries, specifically Britain, France, the USA, what they will do is that they will contact the Mensheviks. And they will say to the Mensheviks, we are ready to pay you arms, ammunition, and money. Challenge the Bolsheviks, saying that the Bolsheviks do not represent, Lenin does not represent Russia. This is how ISIS was created. This is how Taliban was created. This is how Mujahideen was created. This is how Saddam Hussein was created. This is how Gaddafi was created. This is how every evil power in the world has been created. When the West tries to meddle into the politics. So Britain, France, and America, it was something not new. They were ready to basically sponsor a civil war in Russia. Sponsor a civil war in Russia. And this is basically the Red Army, because red was the color of communism. They used to have the White Army because that was the color of their flag. And now between 1917 to 1922, Lenin had to now fight a war within his own country, sponsored by the West, to protect the socialist revolution as he thought about it. But ironically, the Red Army prevailed, the Bolsheviks prevailed. And out of this frustration, where basically Lenin and specifically Stalin could see that the West is becoming extremely nervous of how socialism is rising, Lenin comes up with a plan. He says we need to bring all socialist Soviets together. And therefore, in the period between 1922 to 24 and finally in 1924, Russia will change its name to USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. He argued that all socialist republics need to come together and USSR will be born as the first communist or socialist nation in the world. Now understand this point. 1924, 25, Lenin will die. Lenin will die in 1925 and Stalin will take over. Stalin hated the West. And literally, Stalin wanted to shove the Russian Revolution, the concept of Bolshevism, into the throat of Europe. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I want you to remember 4 points. If you can remember these 4 points, I'll make a timeline for you and I'll be happy to leave you early today because it's been a heavy class. Now, there are 4 points which you need to remember. The simple straightforward point is first, second, third, fourth. First point you have to remember from the previous class is Treaty of Versailles or Versailles is the worst treaty, did not give anything to Italy and humiliated Germany. Can you remember this point? I have to build up on this tomorrow. You can remember this point? Yes, very good. Then the second would be socialism rose as a new concept which had the potential to destroy capitalism and topple governments in Western Europe. Can you remember this point for me? Yes or no? We'll talk about Achutari. Italy did not get Trinotristeria. Very good. The third point which you need to remember is Central European map has been messed up by Treaty of Versailles. Again, a point which I will discuss with you tomorrow, which is the fragile democracies. And last but not the least is Stalin wants the revenge for the Russian Civil War and socialism spreading in Europe. If you can remember these 4 points, I'll give you the timeline and we stop for today. Fragile democracies means democracies which are not strong enough to withstand internal conflicts. Yes, 4 points. If you can remember these, I will build upon each one of them and add. Basically, these are the reasons for the Second World War. These are reasons for the Second World War. Now, last point is the timeline for Russia. When we talk about the timeline for Russia, we are talking about as Balkan and Central, Hungary, Austria, Czechoslovakia, that. We'll see. You will see tomorrow. Russia projects power. Manifesto. April thesis. Then can you remember this timeline? Can you remember this timeline? Yes. So if yes, tomorrow when we come back, we talk about fragile democracies. We'll talk about the world after, and we will discuss the Great Depression. And then tomorrow we talk about Hitler and Mussolini, and we start the war by Saturday. Done? I'll leave you on this slide. And if you don't have a doubt, you can leave the session. I'll not teach from here on out. So thank you so much. I hope Marxism makes sense to you, and these things now make sense to you generally. Yes? Okay. USSR is born once the Russian civil war is over and the Bolsheviks prevail thereafter. We don't have to go into the civil war. That is not part of your syllabus. Yes, Hiba, in a way. In a way. In a way. Yes, Deepika, you will change it. You have to change your orientation. The people of India will change. Which character comes first in Russian Revolution and how? Which character means what? Lenin is the first to emerge. What was Japanese war? Russo-Japanese war fought over Manchuria. Manchuria is lost to Japanese. Russia is humiliated. Yes, there's a class on Saturday at 6 a.m. I'll tell you about that tomorrow. Why did Lenin run? Because he was a wanted man. August of 1917, Kirilov tries to capture power. People see that the army is trying to capture power. That is the issue. So people lost faith in the army also. Okay. See you tomorrow, 6 a.m. This buffer which I've given you today, enjoy it. Very rare, but because I understand it's a heavy class, I'm giving it to you. See you at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Bye-bye.